if you're doing a B2B launch, you're going to have to spend about 10 weeks on this. So there's a process that I've fine-tuned over, having done this dozens of times. I think 10 weeks is the right amount of time. Depends on where you're starting. Obviously, if you're a B2B startup, you are hopefully always launching. So you're launching your company and brand, you are launching products and features, and you're launching campaigns. So hopefully you're always doing a launch.
Today's episode is about how to launch a product, a company, or a feature in a successful way in today's noisy environment. Our guest is Sumeru Chatterjee, the head of growth at CoWorker AI, the first AI agent for complex work. CoWorker is a fast-growing AI company we're lucky to be investors in, alongside many other great firms such as ENIAC and Abstract. And Sumeru was an early employee at 4 unicorns, plus he ran his own launch agency called LaunchMob prior to joining CoWorker. So with that, welcome, Sumeru. It's wonderful to have you on.
Thanks, Pascal. Truly an honor and really excited to jump into our conversation today.
Likewise, because today's topic is a fantastic one. So how to nail your product, your company, or your feature launch, which is no small feat in today's very noisy environment. Now, right, you've done this successfully many times, so I'd love to jump straight in. How do you structure a successful B2B launch?
Having done this several times, I think if you're doing a B2B launch, you're going to have to spend about 10 weeks on this. So there's a process that I've fine-tuned over, having done this dozens of times. I think 10 weeks is the right amount of time. Depends on where you're starting. Obviously, if you're a B2B startup, you are hopefully always launching. So you're launching your company and brand, you are launching products and features, and you're launching campaigns. So hopefully you're always doing a launch. But a big launch takes about 10 weeks. You can break them up into sort of 3 launches, what I would call like a P0 launch. This is when you are launching the company itself, your first time going to market a brand. There's a P1 launch. This is when you're launching a suite of products or you're entering a new market. And then what I would call a P2 launch. This is sort of smaller, product updates, features, things that are sort of extensions, etc. So I think most people generally have a sense of P0, P1, or P2. Not everything takes 10 weeks. So I'm going to go through this process as if we were talking about a P0 company-wide, absolute most important priority 10-week launch. And then obviously you can pare it down for a P1 or a P2.
So where do I get started?
Assuming you're doing a P0 launch for the first time, before the 10 weeks start, there's a little bit of foundation work. And then the 10 weeks are really broken down into, I would say, 4 chunks. The first 2 weeks are around defining the dream customer and the channels that you pick. The second 2 weeks are around designing messaging, positioning, and why it should matter. This is a really important part of what's the message you want to get out. The next 2 weeks are going to be about selecting the specific GTM play, designing a creative concept, building the concept, and then designing the campaign structure. And then the last 2 weeks are around measurement, scaling, putting money where doubling down on things that are working, pulling back on things that are not working.
If I'm a founder who's never done this before, how should I think about this stage of the launch process?
So let's go through the research and foundations piece. This is maybe about a week's worth of work. The first step I would do if I was a founder doing a P0 launch is get into your customer conversations. So start with the recordings you already have from your sales process or from your customer discovery. This could be in a call recording software like Fathom or Gong, etc. And just run through the transcripts of your last 20 calls, ideally 10 closed won calls or 10 closed lost calls. Download the transcripts, upload them into your favorite AI, and just ask AI to break down what are the main pain points that come up in these conversations. Why are people buying from us? Why are people not buying from us? What are people doing in the absence of our software? And just sort of go through all of these foundational PMM questions with an AI of your choice. Most call recorders can do this natively, but if you can't, you can just pull your transcripts and push it into an AI. And you're basically you're mining for insights on why people buy your product, why they don't buy your product, why they buy your competitors' products. What do they do if they're not using your product? How are they getting the job done today? And really sort of narrowing in on those pain points and foundational jobs to be done.
That makes sense. I mean, ideally, right, this is work that you do anyways, but kind of seeing a lot of startups, it unfortunately isn't work that is done always. So it makes sense. What am I looking for? What does a kind of a best-in-class result look like or format look like on the other side of these kind of 1 to 2 weeks of foundation work?
So that's step one. Step two is doing, asking a couple of questions about like who's your dream customer, basic ICP type of exercise. Like, what are the key challenges they face? Who are they? What do they do in their job? What's the best part of their job? What's the least favorite part of the job? What kind of sources they of information they rely on? Same thing about the company, and same thing about the market. Okay, you're basically doing a lot of foundational research to answer really 4 questions. The first one is, you want a Miro board, or you want some, 4 stickies with an ideal customer profile that answers 5 questions. The first one is, what is, who's the buyer persona? What kind of company do they work at? What are their top 2 jobs to be done? And what is the current way that they are doing this job in the absence of your product, service, or software? Okay. That's what I would call a really good like audience selection or ideal customer profile. Okay. So that's on the customer side. Then on the product side, on what you're selling, is you are trying to answer a couple of more questions. What are you launching? What's changing about the world that requires this new product or service? Okay. Number 3 is, why should somebody care? Not somebody, but why is it the person that you just defined in the previous step? Why should they care about this new thing? And then the last one, which I think a lot of founders miss, is how should they feel about something, right? So a lot of AI startups, some take a fear-driven approach of marketing, right? Take a company like Artisan, for example, or some take, hey, there's new things you can do that you couldn't do before, right? Or some take a pain sort of based approach, but there's a certain emotion behind every launch, and nailing what the emotion needs to be, whether it's fear, whether it's excitement, whether it's relief, whether it's excitement, whatever, different emotions that you want to nail towards. That would be the second step.
Can you give me examples of like taglines or messaging that kind of triggers these emotions that you found particularly great?
So right now, there's, obviously I work for an AI startup, so mostly spend a lot of time looking at what AI startups are doing. If you take a company like Artisan's Launch, they build an AI SDR. Their whole tagline was "Stop hiring humans." And that was a fear-based sort of strategy, which is like, they wanted to trigger this emotional response of people saying, "I'm losing my jobs to AI." Okay, so that was sort of like a fear-based. If you take another company like Cluely, for example, they had these billboards that it said, "Hi, I'm Roy. I'm 21. Please buy my AI product. This billboard was very expensive," something like that, right? That was a little bit more like curiosity and humor-based approach, right? They wanted Cluely to be something that people are curious about. Whereas Artisan, they wanted something to, for people to feel like a little fearful and hateful towards. All of this is designed to create virality, designed to create shareability, etc. But I think the reason why those campaigns work is because there is some emotion. When you see that campaign, you feel some emotion behind it, which I think is really important.
Too many, especially B2B campaigns, right, trigger zero emotion away to fact-based. So that makes a lot of sense. So we had the first 2 steps, find your ICP and then answer the questions about the product and what you want it to be in the messaging. What are the other steps that I should do in this kind of initial, I guess, 4-week stage of research and then also ICP and positioning work?
Ideally, it shouldn't take 4 weeks. Ideally, this is like a couple of days worth of work. I think we're, basically, I want founders to spend a few days just nailing their ICP. What's the product? Why should they care? What's the emotion behind it? And then we get into our 10-week process. So I think, if you've done a couple of questions on like, why are people buying our product? Why are people not buying our product? Who's the ICP? What are their pain points? What are the jobs to be done? I think you're ready to jump into the 10 weeks.
So I did all that work. I have a good understanding. Maybe one more question before we get into the process, which is, right, what does any take on like what does good look like with regard to actually being ready here when it comes to all of that? Because like, there's a million ways you can do it and can write almost pages and pages and pages of stuff. What are formats or anything else that you've seen, or what should I think of as a founder to basically say I did a good job here and I'm ready to start the 10-week process?
I think it's really just 2 pages with like 4 or 5 sticky notes. The first page is your ideal customer profile. There's 5 sticky notes on it. Who's the buyer persona? What's the company type? What's the job to be done? What's the current way? And what's the blocker with the current way? That's page 1. And then the second page is really, again, 4 sticky notes. What's changing about the world? what are we as a company doing about it, why should somebody care, and how should they feel. That's it. 4 sticky notes on each page, and you're done.
Then let's jump into the 10-week process. I did all this work. What should I do now?
So the first 2 weeks is about picking dream customers and channels, right? So this is assuming that you can't sell to everybody and you can't be on every channel because you're a small startup with limited budget and limited funds. The first 2 weeks is uncovering your dream customers, what they care about, who influences them, and what channels we can reach them on. Okay, so this I'll share this document with you, but basically this is 3 tables that you need to fill out. The first one is, who are our top 200 dream customers? Okay, so this is basically now actually putting real companies and people behind the first exercise that we did.
Are we talking about 200 people here? Are we talking about 200 companies here? Like, what does and to what level of detail do I need to get to for this to be thorough enough that it helps me with my launch strategy?
Depends on who your sales motion a bit, right? So if you're a product that can, somebody can sign up on their own and put their own credit card, it's 200 people. If you are more traditional B2B where it requires an enterprise license or enterprise sales, you're probably looking at 200 companies and about 400 to 500 people. But understanding who those 200 people are and actually having specific company names, specific LinkedIn URLs, how many employees per each company. Think of this as like your initial ICP list.
Why 200, right? Especially if I'm going after individuals who can swipe the credit card, shouldn't I target more? Because the ICP for the market almost is I'm sure it's significantly larger than just 200 people in an ideal case.
If you're a truly consumer product, then maybe this is slightly less relevant. We're talking about B2B companies here. Most startups that are in the seed or Series A stage, for them, 200 is enough to get to the next stage that they're getting to, right? So the idea is, what is the smallest number of companies that can get you to your next stage or next round of funding? Usually 200 is enough. And you'll see why that in a second when we talk about the next exercise here.
So what do I do next after I created that list?
Okay, so this is an Excel sheet or Notion table, whatever you want to use. The next step is what I call the Dream 50. Okay, so the Dream 50 is actually 50 people that the 200 list, that your dream customers list, are paying attention to. So the Dream 50 are 50 influencers, let's call them creators, thought leaders, whatever you want to term them. But these are 50 people who already have your dream customers in their audience. And the big reason we do this is because if you're a startup, trying to build an audience is really, really hard. And in 10 weeks, you're better off borrowing, renting, or stealing an audience from the people that already have your dream customers in their audience. So for example, if you are a AI product management tool, you might have people like Lenny Orchisky or Akash Gupta or other sort of product management influencers in your list. If you are selling an AI software, you might have Ali Miller or some of the other sort of like AI influencers on your list. If you are selling sales, you might have sales thought leaders and influencers on your list. So these are people who already have ideally over 50,000 followers in the category of the kind of problem that you solve and already have your dream customers in their audience.
That makes sense. Maybe a couple of follow-up questions here. First one being, right, how broad should I define the category that these influencers can fall under versus how narrow? Example being, right, AI tools versus, I don't know, AI legal tech tools sold to lawyers specifically, or I don't know, whatever it ends up being.
I would say most people actually have some sort of natural intuition here, right? Like if you are in the product management space, you know that Lenny and Akash Gupta and a couple other folks are in the sort of like real core influencers, and you can expand from that from there on, right? You may have sort of smaller product managers who are good, or you might go towards larger influencers who have general tech followerships. I think most founders will have some intuition around it, but basically you're looking for somebody who can say, hey, by the way, I came across this cool tool that helps the product. Just thought it was interesting. And that would drive some sort of engagement or traffic. So basically, you're looking for people who have conviction and some sort of reputation in the field that you're trying to sell into.
These people are quite hard to get to, and I'm sure they get completely swamped when it comes to requests and anything else. How to think about that part? actually getting their attention and getting them to do it?
We'll come to that in the next step. So having these people is super important because you now feel more confident that there is distribution, right? You can get to 1 million, 2 million, 5 million people because you can see physically on a board that there are people who have this audience. Okay, so this step is very important because whether you reach out to these people and ask for free publicity or paid publicity or partnership or some sort of like other structure, you as a founder now have confidence that there are people out there who care about the same problem that you're solving and who have the reach and the audience to do it, right? So this is almost, there's an emotional component of doing this exercise, and there's obviously a very practical component of doing this exercise.
This obviously works well for companies, right, that sell into PMs or folks in the tech industry. What if I sell to insurance brokers, to home services businesses, to, I don't know, like a lot of these industries that aren't necessarily as much on the LinkedIns and X's of the world? How do you think about that part?
In my agency, I worked with a bunch of different startups. Some were in sort of like more boring spaces like hard tech or legal, etc. So obviously this works best if you're selling to like PMs and salespeople that are on LinkedIn. But every profession, if not influencers, they have gathering spots, right? So if you're in a hard tech industry or let's say legal, etc., you may not have like the traditional influencers, although that's changing very quickly. What you may likely have is an association or a community or a organization that sort of like still brings those people together. They have a distribution list, they have an email list, they have a magazine. Every profession has some association or some professional body where the professionals collect. So it may not be an individual influencer, but then in your case, it may be a community, organization, conference, magazine, etc., or even a blog for that matter.
One kind of failure mode that I see a bunch of founders do is focus too much on trying to get to build an audience on the LinkedIns of the world themselves for almost like ego reasons, even if their customers aren't necessarily on that platform. And so I think it's a very important thing to call out, is to truly try to understand where do your customers actually consume content, and therefore choose your channels very wisely, and don't just go for clicks and engagement on whatever platform you want to be famous on or be an influencer on yourself.
And I work for an early stage startup. There are other reasons to do the founder led content thing because you have your ideal customers, but you also have your ideal investors and your future investors. So there is some amount of positioning that is important just for that reason. But if you're actually trying to get a launch successful where you don't care about investors, you only care about customers, then making this Dream 50 list and figuring out where is the attention already there, who already has the traffic, is super important.
So we created the list of 200 customers or individuals, and we created our 50 influencer list. What do I do next?
So the next question, and this is part of the first 2 weeks, is figuring out your outreach channel. Okay, so there's basically, let's call it like 15 to 20 B2B launch channels. So this would be the Dream 50 influencer list, founder-led content on LinkedIn, a conference, sponsoring newsletters, cold email outreach, online forums, paid search, affiliate partnerships, SEO, display ads, YouTube, etc. Right? So there's maybe like 15 or 20 channels that you have. And if you are a startup, you can probably only do 2 or 3 really well. Okay. It's very hard for a startup to do LinkedIn and Twitter really well, even though they're quite similar. It's very hard for a startup to do display ads as well as SEO content really, really well. Again, I'm assuming you're a seed or Series A startup, right? If you're a Series B above, then you start to have experts. So what I do is I have an Excel sheet where I have these 15 channels. And then I basically give them a score. Okay. For each startup, I score them on audience density, which is how much of my audience is already on this channel. Second is execution confidence, like how much confidence do I have on executing on this channel. The third is unit economics, like does this channel work for my ACV and my price point? How scalable is the channel? And the fifth one is unfair advantage. Like, do I have an unfair advantage on this channel compared to others? For example, I have a YouTube, I'm a YouTuber, so I have an unfair advantage on YouTube compared to other founders, right? Or I have a large following on LinkedIn. I have an unfair advantage on LinkedIn compared to other folks. So I give them a score of 1 to 5 on those 5 criteria. I total them up, and that usually helps me identify what are the top 3 channels I should focus on for this launch.
I would have guessed that you should put in or like put an outsized weight on audience density, given on what I asked before. But I guess it sounds like you don't necessarily agree with that. Is there a reason why I shouldn't, like, first and foremost, care about the audience density for especially at a product or company launch when I try to speak to potential customers?
Well, firstly, audience density is the most important, which is why it's the first criteria. You can make it fancy by changing the weights and stuff like that if you care, but to be very clear, it is the most important. That being said, usually when people are doing a launch, most founders realize that it's not like, hey, I do a launch and I have customers tomorrow, right? Like they realize that there's some sort of marination period. It takes time to build a brand. You do a launch, people see it, then like 2 months later they come to the website. So I think execution confidence is as important as audience density, because if you're going to do it on YouTube, YouTube has a particular algorithm and a particular strategy that requires 2 to 3 months of investment to see the results, right? If not more. Same thing with any other channel. So execution confidence and unfair advantage are just as important, because if you're not going to stick with it for at least 3 to 4 months, then the audience density won't matter. You should assume that your audience is pretty much on all channels, because that's how normal people behave. I go on YouTube. I also am on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I read emails. Most normal people are on every channel. But the question is like, do you have an unfair advantage, and can you execute well on that channel to actually earn attention there?
So now I know my 2 or 3 channels as well. I have my influencer list. I have my target list. Where to from here?
Obviously, if you choose influencers, depending on what you choose as a channel, there's some amount of like setting up those channels. So if you choose influencers, there's basic amount of outreach involved in reaching out to the influencers, say, hey, I have a launch coming up, would love your support. How can we best work together? If you are doing something like LinkedIn, it's making sure you set up all your employees and the company accounts. Basically, make sure you have the infrastructure in place. If it's cold email, making sure you have all the email inboxes set up and warmed up and the domain set up. So every channel has some sort of setup requirement. So I'm assuming you are doing that. Then we'll move into the next phase, which is phase two. This is weeks 3 and 4. This is about designing the messaging and positioning.
Maybe before we jump into designing, messaging, positioning, any good resources or things you can point to for people that aren't fully sure what to do with regard to the different channels to get them ready, right, for kind of a more scalable approach?
Let's just go through a couple examples. So, on my list here, I have the influencer marketing one. That's we haven't used that in the past, but it's very popular. If you're doing something like Dream Influencer, you should have your list. You should be able to reach out with them with a little bit of a press kit or a media kit that says, here's my launch. We would love for you to like talk about it completely in your own style. We are happy to offer you our product for free. We're offer you payment or a percentage of revenue, whatever you want to structure it. So basically, that's one example if you're doing influencer marketing. And if you're not confident doing that, there are also influencer agencies like Creator Match and Creator Buzz, etc., that help you match with B2B influencers.
I'm assuming that's quite expensive, or like, do you have any idea with regard to, obviously it depends on the audience and so on, what kind of ballpark figures what I should budget on the influencer side?
It can be anything from 10,000 upwards of $250,000 for a launch. But I have folks who are doing Series A, Series B launches for like $15,000, $20,000 on influencer budget, because you can do like a pay-per post. On LinkedIn, the post rates are anywhere between $300 and $700 a post, right? So you get, let's say, 20 great influencers. That's $10,000. That's not crazy compared to what you would spend on LinkedIn ads or boosting your thought leadership stuff. So it can still relatively be a quite a cost effective channel.
What are examples of other channels and what I should think there with regard to getting them ready?
We'll talk about this when we talk about the CoWorker launch. But like one hidden channel that we had an unfair advantage on was our investor network. We had some incredible, we had like 12 VC companies, 75 different investors who had invested in CoWorker. So we found like a very interesting channel there. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the CoWorker launch. So if you have investors, making sure you have, again, same thing, having a press kit, media kit, like sample messaging, sample copy, sample images you want them to use as part of your launch. That stuff is super important. If you're doing something like sponsored newsletters, that's another common or another popular channel. Usually, again, you can just Google search for like what are the top newsletters in your niche. So if you're a product manager, there's like at least 20, 30 Substacks on product management. and you got to reach out to every single one of them with, again, that press and media kit, how much you're willing to pay or exchange. In some cases, you'd be surprised like how much some folks are willing to do for free, because keep in mind you're also providing them content, right? And so they also need to be posting, they also need to get a newsletter out, they also need to have a LinkedIn calendar filled up. So if you are sending something that's interesting, useful, entertaining, valuable, if it's a cheat sheet or a document that you're sharing with their audience, many folks are happy to do for free because they are adding value to their network. So I wouldn't discount the like, hey, can you help me out with this launch? This might be useful for your audience play as well. So, if you're doing sponsored newsletters, find a list of 20, 25 newsletters, reach out to every single one of them and say, I'd like you to post about this launch. Tell me a little bit about how we might work together. And usually they can be quite flexible. That a newsletter sponsorship can be anywhere between $500, in some cases $0, right? But typically about $500 to $5,000. So that's another channel. If you're doing cold email or email based, that's a whole separate conversation we can get into. So, every channel has some basic stuff. It's not rocket science. It's basically getting a press and media kit together, having great copy, having, something valuable for their audience that their audience can like learn from or download, etc. And just ask them what they want in exchange for helping you promote your product.
Let's move on to the next step. What do I do now? I have all of this ready. Is it go time yet?
So a couple of things here. And, the question a lot of people is like, hey, what should I talk about in my launch? Or like, what should my offer be, etc. So I think there's the second part here is like designing the offer. And this is really important. If you look at the top launch experts, it's usually not B2B folks, right? It's B2C folks. When I grew up in marketing, it was Russell Brunson. He was sort of like the godfather of digital marketing and launches. Right now, the guy who's trending is a guy called Alex Hormozi. He's quite insufferable, but has millions and millions of followers and does launches really well. He just launched his book called $100 million Leads or $100 million Offers or something. And I think they sold like $40-50 million worth of books in one day, which is absolutely crazy because he does launches really well. And one of the core elements of doing a launch is basically designing the offer. Okay. So what are you offering? And Hormozi's framework, you can look it up, is basically the offer has to have a high upside, okay, with a high probability of success, with low downside and low risk, right? So you try to maximize the upside and minimize the downside, and that's what creates a really good offer. But typically for B2B startups, like because they're not thinking in consumer orientation, some very basic stuff, if you haven't done, is basically figuring out your basic value proposition design. Okay. So this framework is borrowed heavily from Fletch PMM, who are some of the like Robert and Anthony are like the top, product positioning folks. But they basically get them to answer these 8 questions. Okay. So think of them as little stickers on a board. Same thing. Who is our persona? What are they trying to do? Which is like, what is the use case? How are they doing it today, which is the current way? What is the limitation of the current way? Because of the limitation, what is the problem, aka the blocker of progress? So this is the 5 questions about your audience. And then now we have to answer questions about us, the product. So here you say, what is our core capability of our product? And this should remove the limitation that you just mentioned. The second is, what is our main feature that we're introducing? And the third one is, what is our main benefit? Okay. The benefit should reverse the problem that we had in the previous in the previous example. So persona, who is the persona? What are they trying to do? How are they doing it? What is the limitation of the current way? What is the blocker because of the limitation? As a result, what is the capability that we offer? How do we do it with the feature? And what is the benefit of that? If you can nail these 8 little, like think of them as stickies on a wall, you have the basics of a product positioning or of a market positioning or of a value positioning exercise. And this is going to come up again and again in your launch. If you don't get this right, your launch will feel flat. It won't resonate, it won't hit, it won't be clear why somebody should care about your product. So if you haven't done this exercise, I would, encourage people to go through at least 1v1 of this exercise so that they can create offers that resonate with their audience instead of being like, download my product for 20% off or for 2 months free.
What are examples of really great offers that companies have done that you've come across?
I would say there's like 2 or 3 kinds of offers that people do when they're doing launches, right? So the first one is like a value exchange offer. So right now, when AI first came out, you saw a lot of people being like, "Hey, I created this like master AI prompt library of 100 prompts. Comment AI to get it," right? And they're super cringy, but everyone who sees those posts, you'll see that there's thousands and thousands of comments under them, right? And when you see it on LinkedIn, you're like, how is this happening? This seems absurd. Like people are commenting AI for something that they could just go to ChatGPT and prompt themselves. Like, why is this happening? But I think people underestimate how important and how valuable it is to package something well and put it in something that's like visually appealing, easy to read, etc. Right? So that's a simple example coming from the understanding or coming from the insight that AI is complicated and people like things in pretty little boxes. So that would be like a very common everyday example of like a mini offer or value exchange offer, right? A better offer or sort of a very common offer that I see that like Russell Brunson, Alex Hormozi, etc. use, for example, is what they call a tripwire. Okay. Here it's like you basically say, "Hey, come download my book or buy my book." And the book is like maybe $0 or $1 or $7. They actually lose money on the book, but when you buy the book, you get their email, and then over the next 6 months they try and sell you on their sort of like higher funnel offers. So that's another example of like a tripwire offer.
And do you have to like discount the book heavily or something, right? Like what is if you just say buy my book, that's not really a value offer. So like what is the offer when in such a tripwire setup?
Again, it changes all the time. So the famous like Russell Brunson book funnel was basically he had this book that was $20. It would be discounted to $0, and you'd get an ad for it. He would have to pay for the ad. Then you go to check out the book. The book actually is $0. You only have to pay for shipping, which is $10. So basically, the shipping covers the shipping cost and the ad cost, right? And then he makes money later down this funnel selling you ClickFunnels, which is like his funnel software, right? So basically, you're discounting the book or you're making it free or etc. Right? People call them lead magnets today, but the reason why Russell's works so well is because and Alex is because they were physical books that would get delivered to your house. Right? Anyone can do a lead magnet. That's easy. Russell and Hormozi use a very high effort type of an offer to get this done. Right?
Yeah,
So
I've definitely fallen for this and gotten some free books along the way as well.
100%.
So it does work.
They're in the back here, and the books were actually great, right? So those are some common examples from B2C stuff. You can mimic this in B2B as well, but designing the offer, and we'll talk a little more about offer design in the next step, because that's where we spend most of the time. But having your positioning, having it on a website, having sort of like your landing page that says, "This is what we do. This is the problem we solve. This is who we do it for. This is the benefit. This is how this changes your old way." Having a landing page or having a homepage with your positioning on it is actually a step that a lot of startup founders skip. So when they do the launch, they get the traffic, but then the traffic doesn't convert, right? So this week 3 and 4 is really about designing a high conversion landing page for your launch. That's the outcome that you're looking for from this exercise. Just as an example, typically landing page conversions or book a demo conversions for B2B convert at like somewhere between 0.3 and 0.7%. CoWorker's landing page for book a demo or get CoWorker converts at somewhere between 3 and 5%. And the reason for that is because we've designed the conversion as almost like a B2C page. And second is we only have one single like box that you have to fill out. You just enter your work email, right? There's no first name, last name, work email, company size. You don't have to qualify yourself because we can do that on the back with Clay. So having a very optimized landing page is the outcome that you're looking for from this whole value proposition exercise.
And smart, like I haven't thought of it, or because I see too many then sign up pages introducing quite a bit of friction. And so Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with regard to just make it as simple as possible and you do the work on the back end to qualify leads and everything. Anything else that I should consider in this step before I move on to the next one?
One other sort of like last step here, which is understanding or choosing a positioning angle. And there's basically like two kinds of positioning angles. The first one is what is called competitive positioning, and the second one is contextual positioning. I think if you're a B2B startup, this is really important to get right at this stage. This will help you in your launch. And again, some of this is like PMM like product marketing foundations, but because you're doing a launch and hopefully you're doing lots of launches, doing this upfront helps. Competitive positioning is basically you're saying you are positioned against something. So an example is Loom says send a Loom, don't have a meeting, right? Or and so Loom is positioned competitively against meetings. So Loom is saying send a Loom, don't have a meeting. The other option is contextual positioning. Calendly says, hey, we help you book a meeting faster by reducing the back and forth that happens when trying to schedule a meeting, right? So Calendly is contextually positioned within the email or like the meeting booking workflow. They aren't saying have less meetings or don't have meetings or don't send emails. They're just saying we make it slightly easier to do this one thing that is quite annoying. So I'd say choosing a competitive and versus contextual positioning really helps clarify your messaging. As an example, you saw artisans. We talked about that campaign before. They had this whole campaign, stop hiring humans. Guess which guess which positioning strategy that is.
Yeah, of course, right? The counter positioning.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the most clear example of competitive positioning, saying
Yeah.
like, don't hire people, do this instead, right? Thinking about like, are you a better way of doing something that's a little painful, or are you an alternative to doing something? Having that clarity, I think, makes it super easy to go do some positioning work down the road.
That kind of completes this step. What's next?
We're in the phase 3, the most important part of the process. This is basically selecting your GTM play, coming up with a creative concept, and designing the campaign itself. Okay, so the outcome here is you're trying to create a narrative-driven campaign that stands out, earns attention, trust, and converts interest into traffic, into leads. So this is probably the most important part of this.
Just to level set, we're about 4 weeks in now. Kind of how much time should I take out for this next step of the process, given how important it is?
This is probably weeks in my diagram. This is weeks 5 through 8. So so this is probably 3 weeks worth of work, because this is the actual meat. Everything else was getting the oven warm and getting all the ingredients ready. This is where the cooking actually happens.
What do I need to do during the cooking stage to actually really nail this?
Basically, you're trying to do two things: come up with your creative concept, and second, come up with the campaign design. Okay, so let me break those down. There are, in my sheet, I've collected about 46 different startup campaign ideas or creative concepts. Okay, but there are new ones every single day, etc. So at some point, you got to sit down in a white room and literally think about like, what is the creative concept based on all the research we've done, all the the positioning exercises we've done. What are some creative ways of activating our launch? Okay, so let's assume you're doing a product launch, or let's say assuming you're doing a campaign launch, or even if you're launching your brand as a whole, right? Like you see these like YC launch videos every day. There's a lot of work and thinking that's gone in to figure out like, how do we talk about our company? How do we, what's the sort of like creative concept? So I'll give you one simple example. Like the most boring example here would be you launching a white paper which introduces a new way of doing the work you're trying to do. So for example, if you're in sales software, this might be Sales 3.0, a white paper on what's changing about the sales world. It sounds boring, but Gong did this extremely successfully when I was there back in 2017, 2018. They had this whole like Sales 2.0 playbook, which was all about data driven sales. That stuff is quite common now, but in 2017, 2018, that was quite like new and exciting. And they just produced some really interesting content about, what to say and not say in sales conversations, when to bring up pricing based on the data that they had. And they ran that campaign for basically the better part of 2 years, and it was like their highest ROI campaign. So that would be like the sort of most commonplace boring example would be like, we're sales 2.0 or 3.0 or product marketing 3.0 or the future of revenue intelligence, the future of sales operations, whatever it is that you do, right? Becoming a lawyer 3.0 and having a campaign around that.
How much of that has to be insights versus just you, right, almost promoting yourself? Or like in Gong's example, how much of that was just them spending time on like, hey, we are sales 3.0 versus them delivering interesting insights around like what to say in sales conversations versus not?
I would say most companies who do this do the second part. Like they focus on the insights and the POV. Like some people call this like a opinionated point of view. Ideally, it's backed by some data and backed by some insights, and it's not you just making stuff up. But that would be an example of a very common like POV based, insights based launch campaign. Something on the opposite end of the spectrum would be something like Delve's, seed stage campaign. Delve is a security startup. They were like, you know what? We only want to get to, again, they had this dream list of 200 customers. Okay. So what they did was they literally printed out doormats with those dream customers' logo. And at the bottom, it said something like, step into better security with Delve, right? Like really tiny, their logo, big logo of the prospect. And then they like physically drove around San Francisco and like mailed out, these like 300 doormats. And every single one of them, or at least most of their prospects, took a photo, posted on LinkedIn or shared it on Slack, and now at least they know Delve is a startup that does security. They don't know exactly what it does, but that campaign probably cost them like under $10,000 to do, right? But it was a really creative campaign because nobody was doing physical stuff, and most physical stuff tends to be like swag, like pens and notebooks, like shit that people throw away, right? But a doormat is something that you're going to see on your door every single day, and nobody gets doormats as gifts. So the creative concept can be something as traditional and boring as a a book, a lead magnet, a thought piece, a white paper, all the way to like really creative guerrilla campaigns. Unfortunately, nobody can tell you what to do here. This is why you have creative people on your team. It doesn't have to be from marketing. Like some of the most creative people can be from engineering, can be from product, can be from design. You don't need to have a marketer on the team to do this, but you do need to have creative people who are excited about introducing like a bold idea and understand the buyer persona, the jobs to be done, the problems, the positioning, so that the campaign can be relevant, right? I have a list of 46 that I'm happy to share for people who are looking for inspiration. But I don't want to gatekeep anything because you have AI today. You can go to an AI agent and say like, give me 50 different B2B launch ideas, and it will generate something. But it's actually about having taste and conviction and courage to pick a bold one and go after it.
Just maybe we won't go through all 46, but just like another kind of 2 or 3 examples of some of those that were executed well, just for people who only want to quickly listen to this for inspiration.
I used to run a launch agency, so I basically invented these for a living. So I'll give you some quick examples from my actual customers. We had one software AI company in the security space. So the way most people do security is called RBAC or ABAC, like roles-based access control or attribute-based access control. And so they had something, basically one place coming up with an invented concept. And so they invented something called autonomous access control. Okay. And it was basically this whole like security 3.0 idea, right? So an invented concept is a very common example. The second one is a growth tool. So a growth tool is basically a mini tool that's not your main software, but that does one thing for your audience really well. So for an example is if you are in the startup space and you help other startups do something, you could have a free logo maker or something that does your startup incorporation really easily.
That's like HubSpot's website grader or something back in the
Sure.
day.
Yeah.
That exactly achieved that. Yeah. Okay, then that makes sense.
So that's another very common example. Another example would be a physical activation. So like I said, the example from Delve was like they literally sent out 50 doormats as part of like a physical activation, physical campaign. Exa did something very similar with balloons. So you can have physical activation. The third one is a very common one that you see on LinkedIn all the time, is some sort of like a resource or cheat sheet. So this is like a content first based play, and those can be huge. Like I said, Alex Hormozi just did $40 million with one piece of content, but he spent a lot of time and effort on that content. Another example could be something that I really like and I've done successfully is basically doing like a industry recognition or an awards campaign. So let's say you are in RevOps, you might do like the top 50 RevOps executives or something like that. Hopefully, you're being honest about it and not using that purely for marketing, but there's some value there. So those are like 4 or 5 examples of different campaigns. You know, or for example, you'll see the one coming up from us in a couple of months. I can't share that, but you can also do a competitive campaign. So the most popular tool right now for GTM is called Clay, right? So there's a startup that is competing with Clay called Speckle, I believe. Double check their name, but Clay had a big conference, and they had this whole campaign that said, you went to the Clay conference, you're probably confused. GTM engineering sounds too complicated. Switch to Speckle, and we will transfer all your Clay credits for free, and give you whatever, some like 1,000 free credits or something like that, right? So that's a very targeted campaign, but that's because they know that they are competitively positioned against Clay, and that Clay is a market leader, right? So those are some examples of 4 or 5, but I can send you my full list.
No, I appreciate that. So now, right, we're at the end of week 8. What should I have at the end of week 8 in this stage to be ready then for the next step?
Okay, so you're actually at the end of week 5, or week 5. The two, so this is on coming up with the concept, right? And this is a lot of creative ideation, creative brainstorming, thinking through, like putting 50 ideas on a page and decide, sitting down with a team and picking one campaign idea. Then the second part of this exercise is to actually design the campaign structure, basically design what I would call like the funnel, right? So let's say, actually, let me ask you, out of all the campaigns that I mentioned, pick one that you really liked.
The free tool one is the one that I've probably seen the most and companies gravitate towards. So like the HubSpot website grader.
Okay, so let's go with that.
Example.
Yeah, so great example, right? So that's your concept. That's your sort of creative concept. You still had to have picked 3 channels. So let's say you pick newsletters, influencers, and communities. Okay, I'm just saying an example. The week 6 and 7 is actually the campaign production part. Okay, and there's a couple of pieces here. There's the production itself, which is you got to make the tool, you got to produce it, you got to design it, etc., etc. You got to create the landing page for it, you got to create all like the visual and the supporting assets for it, right? So like designing the tool itself and then designing all the materials around it. The second is the outbound piece. So if you are going with your with influencers, communities, and I forget the third one, right? But let's say you're going and newsletters, you have to send out 500 emails and say, hey, we're launching this tool on this date. We would love for your audience to have free access or 100 free credits. We're offering to pay you X amount. Here's the media kit. Here's the landing page. Here's the assets. So there's the outbound piece of structuring this, and you got to do that in week 5 so that they're ready in week 10 to actually do the launch. So there's the outbound piece. Then there's the inbound piece, which is designing the 14 days of LinkedIn content or Twitter content that you are going to do organically, designing the landing page, and then the funnels beyond the landing page. So when somebody signs up for the tool, what is the email sequence that happens after? Do they lead to a demo? Do they lead to a call? Do they lead to another landing page? So like designing the funnel itself is, and creating all like the emails, the sequences, subsequences, what happens if somebody engages, what happens if somebody doesn't engage, and then also figuring out if you have a paid strategy associated with this. Maybe you're just sponsoring newsletters, maybe you're targeting some words like website grader if you are launching a website grader. So having those pieces is the bulk of the work. There's I'm happy to share this with you, but there's basically like some 6 or 7 core funnel diagrams. So there's like a product sales diagram funnel, there's a lead magnet funnel, there's a survey funnel, there's a mini mastermind funnel. There are all these like pre-designed funnel templates, and think of them as like basically large diagrams on N8N or whatever your favorite automation tool is that says what happens when somebody comes to this website. what happens if they drop off, what happens if they do enter the email, what happens if they open the first email but then don't respond to the others, what happens if they respond to an email. So like designing that whole piece is the bulk of the work here. And now this is complicated. You can do it with one person, like just one funnel builder who's working on this. Usually, if you're an early stage startup, it's whoever is your sole marketing person, or sometimes the founders themselves. But none of this is rocket science.
So ideally, right, you execute in weeks 6 and 7, you said. So by the end of week 7, you did the creative part in week 5, you did the execution piece in week 6 and 7, you're fully ready to go, more or less. What do I do now?
So then it's basically doing the countdown, right? And this is the really, really, really important piece from like a keeping everyone on the same page, and like it's basically the herding cats part of the launch. So assuming you're launching in week 10, basically week 8, 9, and the week of the launch, it's all your pre-launch content has to be going out. So hopefully you have a 14-day calendar of content that you've already built that like teases the launch and says, hey, something, the founders are like, something is coming, something big is coming. Here's a landing page, go sign up for the wait list for the thing that's coming. You have all your commitments from your influencers and your sponsors that they will do the post on that day, and that some will do it on the launch day, some will do it like 3 days after, some will do it 5 days after. So you basically sort of like see the campaign continue for a few days.
Just to clarify, a 14-day calendar, at what point do you launch within? Is it like 7 days before, 7 days after, or like what does that look like?
Yeah, so typically I recommend 14 days pre-launch and then 7 to 10 days post-launch. Okay. I mean, this is all flexible, but in my 10-week process, this assumes that basically 14 days before launch, you have some content going out every day. You have an email going out to your existing audience saying something is coming. It's kind of like teaser type of stuff, right? 7 days to go, 3 days to go, 1 day to go, like that kind of content. And you're using that time to make sure that your partners, which is your influencers or your newsletters or your other communities, etc., have what they need. They're ready, they're prepared, all their questions are answered, and just like troubleshooting small pieces of the testing the campaign itself, testing the lead magnets, testing all the automations. So I would say like testing and pre-launch content is the last 14 days. And then you have a launch day. That day is obviously my favorite day. I love launch days. We have one coming up in a couple of weeks, so I'm really excited about. That's when like all the excitement's happening. You're posting, reposting. Hopefully, you have a spreadsheet that tracks all the links of people that have posted, and then you get everyone in your company and everyone else that to like engage with that content. So I have this like big matrix of all the posts that have gone and all the employees in our company. And then there's like these massive check boxes, and you're making sure that each employee is boosting and promoting all the content that has gone out from other folks. And then there's like this rich mix of people like supporting the launch content, etc. Right? So that's the launch day. Usually you'll see a big spike in traffic. It's very exciting, lots of stuff happening. And then, 2, 3 days later, things start to get cold, right? And this is when it's really important to have already had the relationships with, your influencers or your communities to like post 3 days after the launch, 5 days after the launch, 7 days after the launch. Um, Maybe you're doing product hunt 10 days or 7 days after your main launch. Maybe you're doing something separately on Reddit after like 10 days after the launch. So basically having some sort of like post-launch secondary event. This could be a webinar about the launch. This could be a small like roundtable about the launch. It could be on a second channel like Reddit or Reddit AMA, or a product hunt launch, or going on Y Combinator's Bookface, etc., just to make sure that your campaign is not a 1-day blip, and that it runs for at least like 14 days. And there you go. That's your full full B2B launch in 10 weeks. And then obviously, post launch, there's all the analytics and tracking. So hopefully by now you've already set up Hotjar on your website, and Amplitude or Google Analytics. You have a Google Tag Manager set up. You have your CRM that's tracking, leads. You have your email sequencing tool that is sending out all the lead magnets, or helping sending out all the emails that are post launch. So monitoring those, replying to the emails that you're getting, replying to conversations on LinkedIn and Twitter or whatever channel that you've selected, running the analytics, making sure that the emails are flowing, the tags are working, and the data is coming through is maybe another week or so of work, and that's a full 10-week launch.
Couple more follow-up questions on the launch specifically, right? So you have, say, in the example that you gave where you work with newsletters, influencers, and communities, how should I think about, right, concentration of people emphasizing it or talking about it on the actual launch day versus afterwards? Or kind of any additional tactics that I should use or things to think about during in and around launch day and the follow-up period as well, or even the period before?
Every marketer has a slightly different taste on this, so a lot of this is taste and preference. A lot of folks like to do everything on one day because it maximizes, the amount of attention you can grab, and the algorithms favor to some amount a larger amount of noise. It's more likely for it to become a trending topic, for example. Some people like to basically do 75%. I would say, if I were to draw rough numbers, you probably want 75% on launch day and the rest 25 over the next 10 days. It would be a very easy, back of the envelope math.
If you think about the actual launch day, or do you already mention you basically want, or do you want to have a spreadsheet of everyone reposting it and everyone you've pinged and all of that? And then you also want to have every employee of the company, ideally potential investors and everybody else who's friendly, to get them to engage with every single post to get as much velocity as possible. Are there specific, like one of the things I was told is ideally you comment with 7 words or more on LinkedIn, so right that it gets, the algorithm picks up on that versus it isn't just an AI generated, this is a basic type answer or anything. Are there any other tactics or things that you need to consider, like, I don't know, time to response or anything else on launch days like this?
Firstly, if anyone tells you they know the answer, they're lying. Like, nobody knows anything about the algorithm. I think that kind of optimization is probably less critical or less important. Like, most people who are on LinkedIn or on these platforms have their own voice and have a way of speaking. So I don't like directing people on what to say or what to do. If they are posting and they're not used to posting, I like to provide 4 or 5 different sort of like post options for copy. But when it comes to like commenting and timing of the commenting, I think that's like over optimizing. You'd much rather spend your time trying to get new people to talk about it, as opposed to trying to optimize the engagement farming within your existing network.
Anything else, right? Tactics or things to consider on launch day that one may not be thinking about?
So the first one is make sure you have you've tested all your funnels and your flows before, and there's always like small things that come up. Oh, the HubSpot data is not going back to Google, or the email data is not going back to HubSpot. So just making sure like that sort of infrastructure is in place is number one. Number two is, if you're in B2B, I think it also helps to have a decent amount of and this is something I'm going back and forth with my sales lead on, is I think it helps to have some sales capacity to take some high intent calls that day, or sort of like that 2 weeks. So as part of the launch, if somebody comes in via the launch and they download something, and there's somebody who's a great ICP fit, which you can score with Clay, it makes sense to take them out of like the automated stuff and have somebody from the salesperson, sales team reach out and say, hey, saw you were interested in this. Would it be useful for somebody to walk you through this stuff, right? And basically have some sales capacity and not just treat it like a marketing launch. And this is something that a marketing leader and a sales leader should have, should be best friends on. And there's a little bit of back and forth on how to do this. But I think having some like call capacity for those 2 weeks makes sense if you expect the launch to go well and drive actual interest.
We all have very short attention spans in today's day and age, and there's only it's hard to say how long that window is, but there's only so long of a window during which someone actually cares about a specific topic. And so, right, if you launch and then it takes 3 weeks until you get them on the phone, by then they may actually have moved on to very different topics and don't really care about you guys anymore. So 100% agree with that.
Yeah, exactly. So basically having some CTA that says like, look, we don't want to sell you, but if you want to be sold to, we're very easily available. Because, people like, there's so many launches where I saw something and I was like, oh, this is interesting, I would check it out. But then the CTA was like, oh, get on a wait list or some shit like that. And I was like, dude, no, I'm not getting on a wait list. Or maybe I got on a wait list, and then by the time they reached out to me, I was like, I've totally forgotten about this, right? So having something that's like immediately actionable, whether that's getting into your product, getting on a call, definitely helps. And you'd be surprised how many B2B companies do this slowly, right? Like, for example, I was looking for a creator B2B influencer marketing agency. I reached out to two agencies that are very popular. One of them got back to me 48 hours later saying, "Hey, we're at capacity, but we can recommend somebody." And then they never recommended anybody. And the other one, it's been 96 hours since I filled out the form and I haven't heard back, right? And this is a B2B company, and I have a $40,000 budget for this project per month, which is a large budget, but just haven't gotten back to me, right? So like for CoWorker, our goal is every lead gets responded to under 4 minutes. So it's like we get to 80% of leads under 5 minutes and like 99% of leads under 10 minutes. Like that's just like how we want to operate, but you'll be surprised that that's not very common in B2B.
Which I'm surprised by, because you're leaving so much on the table.
We're leaving so much money on the
But
table.
yeah, but this is a great segue. So, right, you guys had an amazing launch with CoWorker, actually more than one recently. But I think one was especially a big one where you guys came out, announced the company, the product, and everything to the world. Can you walk me through some of what made the CoWorker launch so successful to make everything that we just talked about a lot more tangible?
Well, firstly, thank you for saying that. That's really nice, and a lot of the credit doesn't go to me; it goes to the entire team, and especially Alex, our CEO, for making such a great for being so passionate about launches. We have another one coming up end of this month, which I hope will blow out our first launch by 10x. So we're very excited about that. But the CoWorker company launch was very successful by sort of traditional measures, and I can walk you through some of it. Maybe I'll spend like 45 seconds recapping what are the main elements, and then you tell me how much time you want to spend on each of those pieces. So at a very high level, it was the company was in kind of like in quiet stealth seed stage under a different brand name. Then we raised a seed round, and we wanted to do a few things together. A, announce a seed round. B, rebrand the company. And C, launch and basically make the product GA and generally available to the market. And we decided to do all three of them together, which is why it was, sort of our big P0 launch, right? Like launching a brand, launching a funding announcement, and launching a product as part of the like, we are out of stealth. We are now ready for the big leagues part of launch. As part of the launch, there was a PR strategy. There was a content strategy. There was a influencer, quote unquote, influencer strategy, which I'll reveal in a second. And then there was a media strategy as well that sort of like all yielded, and we all all orchestrated together. So that's what we did. And I can jump into any part of whether you want to go into like the brand and the product positioning, whether you want to go into the channels, or whether you want to go into the campaign itself.
Maybe if we can unpack just like at a high level all of those, so people get an idea of everything that you did for that launch.
Okay, so at a very high level, we basically announced that CoWorker is a new kind of AI. It's basically, the positioning was, it's an AI for complex work. So we try to position against AI for everyday tasks. That was the sort of like company level positioning. We announced a $13 million seed round, which was quite a big seed round for for that sort of time period. We launched the CoWorker suite of products, and we did it as part of a investor-led like influencer strategy, right? So after the campaign was done, we did about 1.2 million impressions across social. We got picked up by three major press outlets like Yahoo, Business Insider, and I forget a third one. And most importantly, we generated 240 deals through the launch process, which was basically our first $4 to $6 million in pipeline as part of the launch.
To put this in perspective, right, you guys didn't have it because it was a brand launch, a company launch, so that was basically from a standing start, which is pretty amazing in terms of outcome. So what do you believe made this so successful, or maybe go into some of the tactics that you used to make this so successful?
Let's start with the tactics first, and then I'll tell you, maybe we'll back into the strategy first. So we did a bunch of, we did this 10-week launch playbook, and when we got to like, who is our like what's our unfair advantage, and what are what are the channels where we have an unfair advantage on. We definitely picked LinkedIn because A, we knew the audience density was there. B, I had a unfair advantage because I've been writing on LinkedIn every day for the last 5 years. And the other big unfair advantage we had is that we had 75 really, really great early stage investors backing the seed and the pre-seed, right? So and I mean 75 people across maybe like 8 to 12 different VC firms. And we knew that our dream, like these people already have our dream customer in their audiences. And so instead of going with traditional influencers, we basically created this massive spreadsheet that put every single investor there and a little checkbox on whether they've sort of like done their launch post, right? We gave them sample copy, we gave them sample images, and we basically kind of created this like almost like an investor leaderboard or like an investor bake off where every VC wanted, VCs love supporting their portfolio companies. They also want to look like they are adding more value than other VCs on the table. And so it created this like little competitive environment where every VC that we had, including folks from, amazing Focal and Sydney, et cetera, who helped support the launch, making sure that they were doing their task because they could see the list of other investors on the board, right? So that was sort of like our unlock. We basically had 150 different VCs post about our launch, not comment and like and share, but like actually produce their own piece of content, and that drove like basically the first 700, 800K of impressions, because each of them, even if they have small audiences, those numbers add up, right? Like it's 10, 20, 30,000 impressions per VC. Sometimes, their content gets shared or liked or commented on and then boosted further. But we did it all on LinkedIn. We did it all in one day. And then, thankfully we were able to also get some PR articles picked up. So we had to go out on the wire. We had it picked up by Business Insider. We had it picked up by Yahoo. And so all of that on one day created a nice little, circle of engagement. And that's really what got us past our million.
Being on the other side of this, what I remember from you guys' launches, probably in the 1 or 2 weeks before, right? You aligned all the messaging with us. You made sure that we're bought in. You helped us articulate our own messages as part of that. And then the day before, and then especially on the day off, you were very much on our asses, right? Hey, here's what I need you to do. Here's like the post. Here's the images. Go get it done. Following up in Slack channels, like, hey, did you guys post here? This is still missing. So quite a bit of right coordination and effort and everything, but it sounds like it truly paid off. And I think the difference between your launch and some other people's launches is you weren't afraid to ping us 2 or 3 times or ask or whatever. I think like, I don't know if it was me or somebody else, but like I think we did part of it. We wrote our own post, but we didn't repost something or didn't like something or didn't comment on something. So it's a small thing that says, hey, you also need to comment on this specific post. It's like, oh wow, right? That makes such a big difference because it gets people to do everything you need them to do. And as you said, right, these things add up if you combine them all.
Yeah, I think a big. So, firstly, thank you for doing that. It was I know Alex and I just basically pinging all our investors behind the scenes, but
Which is totally fair. That's amazing, right?
I think it's two things. A, people just want clear instructions. So I think the more clear and specific you are, the better. Second is, if it's investors, if it's influencers, whoever it is, everyone wants to help a startup, right? Like there's something inherently feels good about helping a small company go to market because you're basically supporting the underdog, right? So I think, obviously in the case of investors, they have financial incentives to do this as well. They are actually literally invested in the company. So knowing that everyone wants to help a startup and just leaning into that is a big part of this.
100%. What's interesting is, and maybe kind of another topic I want to make sure we touch upon. So this was a lot of what we talked about now was focused on P0 launches. What's your take on doing less frequent, mainly P0 big bang launches versus kind of also doing P1 and P2 launches, and like how should founders listening think about those?
Where I'm trying to get CoWorker to, and I'm not going to put my mouth where my money isn't, is basically one P0 launch or two P0 launches a year at the very least. Ideally, one P0 launch every quarter, right? And then one P1 or P2 launch every month. So that's the cadence that startups need to be at. And I'm actually shocked that even larger companies, like if you take a company like Perplexity, for example, they're doing a launch every 2 weeks. And 90% of the time, they're launching stuff that already exists in the market, or like they already existed. So, for example, the Comet browser was an actual P0 launch, right? Where they launched a completely new product. But if you look at all the other launches that Perplexity has done, they launched like Perplexity for Finance, for example. Okay. You could have, that was already possible from day zero, right? But they treated it as a launch because they realized that finance professionals are its own category. And unless they like call it a launch and call it a product, finance professionals are afraid of using Perplexity for like sensitive data, right? That kind of stuff, or like repackaging Sora into Sora 2, right? Sora could always do videos, but like repackaging that into as Sora 2 and calling that a launch is how OpenAI, took a crack at the whole like image generation market. So the biggest companies nowadays, especially in AI, are doing a launch every 2 weeks, right? Startups absolutely need to be on that cadence. If your question is like, what am I launching every 2 weeks? It's like you should be launching existing products or existing features as launches, right? So, for example, CoWorker did a launch a month ago called Deep Work, right? Which is the ability for CoWorker's AI agent to like jump in and take care of your work autonomously. We have always been able to do that from day one, but we treated it as a launch because a lot of our customers didn't know that the feature existed. And we did the same thing with CoWorker Search or CoWorker Agents, stuff that we've been able to do from day one, but customers just weren't aware of it. The market wasn't aware of it. So we go back and look at our products and features and then treat those as launches and do them as P1, P2 launches.
What should be the minimum bar? Because I think, right, it makes sense around features and everything. But I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this now think about like, or are afraid that things are too small for it to be an official launch. How should I think about like what's too small, what's worthy of a launch? How should I think about that and so on?
Nothing is too small for a launch. I would say, if the company, like I said, if Alex Hormozi is launching a free book and spending $20 million marketing it and making $60 million one day, then then your feature is not too small at all. Okay. A. B. Remember that you're competing against some of the largest companies in the world, and if they are doing this, right? If Perplexity is launching Perplexity for Finance, which by the way, you could literally do from the first day, then you know that nothing is too small, right? It's because like right now, it's all about speed. When somebody comes to your website, when somebody goes to your LinkedIn page, it should appear that you are launching something every 2 weeks, because if you're a high growth startup, you probably are building something every 2 weeks. It's not like your engineering team is sitting there and sucking their thumbs. They are clearly introducing new connectors, new features, new updates, etc. I'll give you an example. Like OpenAI treats every new connector as a launch. So like OpenAI connects with HubSpot now. That was a massive launch, right? This is core functionality that most other AI companies have had from day one, right? Or like OpenAI connects with Slack now. Oh, boom, that's another launch. Okay. I mean, again, smaller P1, P2 launches, but you should treat every connector, every new feature, every new update as a product launch, and do it in a small way. Like, hey, by the way, we now can connect with HubSpot, right? Even if you've been able to do it from day one, it helps to know, because people who are using HubSpot will know, oh, okay, I didn't know this tool connects with HubSpot. I wonder what this tool does, right? There you go. You have some publicity for free because of the HubSpot network. So that's what I would suggest.
Last question on the kind of P1, P2 launches. How should I think about activating my network versus right launch fatigue and everything kind of in between?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I don't have a good answer for this. I think I don't do this well. So I would love some advice from other people who think they do this well. I am a little, because I do so many launches. I am more sensitive to launch fatigue than most, I think, other folks are. Right. So we reserve our extended network for P0 launches because it doesn't make sense to do this on a P1 P2 level. But for P1 P2 launches, I do think what makes sense is to go find newer, smaller niche communities, and helping them, or sort of like promoting there. So, for example, when we did the P0 launch, we pulled in all our investors and did a whole thing on LinkedIn. For something like a deep work launch, which was basically a feature, we tried to find like smaller AI communities or AI newsletters, right? And put like way smaller amounts of budget towards getting that promoted in like smaller, more niche communities. That way, you're not saturating or getting the same folks talking about the same thing all the time. So I think like P1, P2 launches are a good opportunity to like test smaller, newer channels, smaller influencers, other kinds of stuff.
This was already incredibly helpful. Maybe a couple more just short questions to wrap this up. What's been the most kind of non-obvious technique or tactic or anything you've come across that you found pretty cool or insightful across all the different launches you've been involved in?
I'll tell you one that's obvious but underused, and then one that's non-obvious. I think one that's obvious but underused is that if you're a startup of 10 people, okay, let's say, you are connected to over 500,000 people. That's just the math, right? Like if you go look at the average person's LinkedIn follower or their email followers or their friends or their Facebook followers or whatever, right? Instagram followers, you are probably connected to 500,000 people. So I think getting employees activated and what I would call like your core network, right? So this is employees, investors, friends and family, and just getting them involved in a launch will 10x the outcome from any, influencer or like other people, etc. Even if you don't have a perfect audience within those people. I think just like that activating the core network, super obvious, but most people don't do it. So that's I would say is number one. And number two, non-obvious is, I think, and this is like a marketing principle from my CMO at Gong called Udi Ledergor, one of the best marketers in B2B SaaS. He says different is better than better. Okay. So one non-obvious situation or one non-obvious tip is that nobody wants a better version of something. Nobody cares about a slightly better way of doing things, right? People want something that's completely different. And if you're an early stage startup, I think one non-obvious thing is spend less time trying to look enterprise and look more mature and more time trying to like earn attention and like pull from like B2C and pull from like consumer influencer trends, because like consumer influencers and B2C influencers really know how to like earn attention and earn sort of like media space. So the reason why the Artisan and the Cluey launch are so went so viral is because they weren't afraid of doing something completely different and doing something controversial, doing something that may have earned them bad press, right? But guess what? Both of them had massive Series A rounds because their investors knew that they know how to earn attention, which in this AI economy is sometimes more important than product or the actual like core technology itself. So I would say like for if you're an early stage startup, trying to earn attention, not being afraid of bad publicity, your campaign should feel risky. And the one we have coming up in 3 weeks, you will see this in action. Like I will either lose my job or I will be promoted, right? Like there's no middle outcome here. So and I'm okay with that. So like I think a little more risk taking in on the creative side could go a long way for B2B.
I cannot wait for that campaign. You teased it so much, so that'll be a lot of fun. Last question from my end. Right, we talked through a lot of different things and everything, and sometimes it gets overwhelming for someone listening. If founders just take one thing away from this conversation about launches, what should it be?
I think if you want to take one thing away from a launch is to learn how to design one really good funnel. This is something every B2C marketer knows that B2B marketers don't know, right? Is to sit down and learn how to design one good funnel. Okay. And I would say start with something simple like a lead magnet funnel. You have a lead magnet, you have a landing page, there's an exchange of email for a lead magnet, there's an email sequence that goes out that leads to a sales event, okay, which is either a webinar or a sales call. Sitting down, designing one lead magnet funnel or one funnel will help you learn all the pieces that you need to do, and try and get to like 5 or 10 downloads, or whatever, 5 or 10 activations, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be 1,000, it doesn't have to be 100,000, but designing one funnel end to end and figuring out how do you design a landing page, how do you design an email sequence, how do you design an opt-in, how do you design an invitation to an event after the landing sequence. Getting that right will give you the confidence, because everything I explained, by the way, is just that in a much more thoughtful and elaborate way. Right. So the core of everything I'm doing is basically designing funnels, and knowing how to design a funnel and drive traffic to the funnel is the core skill here.
This was incredibly helpful and insightful. Thank you so much for coming on, Sumeru. Learned a ton and really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.